10 years ago, Field launched as a home for people who already knew they were different. Today, an influx of new users are turning to the dating app to help them figure out what they're even looking for. So, is Field changing dating, or is it the other way around? Today, we're joined by Alexandra Kilpatrick, Field's head of research and an anthropologist studying how we connect to our desires and to each other. Together, we talk about how 10 years of the app's evolution and the way its millions of users interact with each other give us a pretty fascinating time capsule. From Me Too and COVID to changing ideas about gender, kink, or even what counts as vanilla, the way we date can tell us a lot about the culture we're living in. And what happens when the fringe stops feeling so fringe? Does Field's explosive growth mean kink has gone mainstream? Or is it just helping all of us get better at naming what we want? Most of us were given a cookie-cutter template for how to live, love, and succeed. But what if you don't fit that mold? What if you're ready to live a little differently, even if that makes you the odd one out?
We're Nyla and Cole, two people questioning the systems, the stories, and the identities that shape us. From politics to pleasure, culture to connection, this is where taboo meets truth.
If you've ever felt like a black sheep, cycle breaker, or someone who doesn't quite fit the cookie-cutter mold, then you're a deviant just like us. Field builds itself as the dating app for the curious, and it welcomes all kinds of people seeking all types of non-traditional relationships. At the moment, users can choose from at least 28 sexual identities and 19 relationship types, and those options continue to evolve and expand. It's really the perfect fit for this podcast, as it's basically the dating app for the deviants among us. At a time when a lot of dating apps are in crisis and struggling to attract users, Field is actually growing at a very impressive speed and attracting quite a broad user base. So talking about the growth of Field gives us the perfect lens to talk about the evolving state of kink and non-traditional relationships. And here to do that, we have a really exciting guest. We've got Field's head of research, Alexandra Kilpatrick. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, welcome.
How did I do with the intro to Field?
Just love the idea of Phil being the home of deviants, and I love how your podcast has kind of reclaimed that moniker. It fills me with excitement to hear it described like that. Maybe we'll speak to the comms team.
Let's.
The other thing that I think makes talking with the Field team so exciting is you have this amazing trove of insights into dating and kink and gender identity because you're sitting on all this research you've collected about how the app is used. We were looking at some of your reports, and you have some amazing stats that you've shared recently. For instance, there's been a 200% spike in interest in pegging in the last year or two. Apparently, Miami is the pegging capital of the world, which is fascinating.
Love it.
Meanwhile, Mumbai is the cuddling capital, which makes me really want to visit Mumbai.
Oh,
Nyla, what were some of the stats that jumped out to you?
I had some favorites. The most heteroflexible city, because I know this identity label was the fastest growing one for a while. The most heteroflexible city is Berlin, which is kind of cool. The roleplay capital, guess where that is? San Francisco.
Fascinating.
I mean, it just goes to show, the cultural nuance that we're dealing with in the data, and that's one of the best things about my job is just seeing that kind of variation across different settings.
It honestly sounds like a bit of a dream job, getting to track this and be part of the evolution of all these conversations. So before we get into it, we want to hear a little bit more about you. How did you become a bit of a deviant and then arrive at the Deviant dating app?
It is absolutely a dream job. It was my dream job, and then it appeared in front of me. I started out studying social psychology. There was a part of my degree that looked at kind of sexuality and sexual dysfunction. I was really interested in that. I always thought I would end up being a psychotherapist or some sort of social scientist. But then I accidentally took a very enjoyable 15-year detour into advertising and strategy. And it was very, very seductive. But I just had this feeling that I kind of traded the career that I was most fascinated by and what I really wanted to do for something that I happened to be good at and that came with this very sort of bougie lifestyle that kept me hooked in for a while. So I did a master's in digital anthropology at UCL, and I did some really interesting comparative work around dating apps in the Middle East and dating apps in the West,
Wow.
and how they are formed kind of differently and how they shape identity and how they're shaped by social structures, government, etc. So it was kind of, things were starting to point in this direction. But yeah, then I ended up working for Meta for years. So again, I took another step away, but I spent a lot of time researching nascent technologies, VR and AR, and hung out in the metaverse a lot. And I saw a lot of kind of highly sexualized behavior in that space as well. Maybe not always great. So lots of signals kind of pointing back to the dream job. And then I remember being at a gig one day and seeing a notification for the job at Field. They had a research job at Field, and I was kind of jumping up and down and grabbing my friend by the arm and saying, "This is my dream job." You know, I had that conversation during my interview where I kind of said, "This is my job, by the way. I'm coming. When can I start?"
Love it.
And I've been there for nearly 2 years now. But it was interesting how kind of all of these things sort of coalesced over the years and pointed to this role. And I feel incredibly lucky and privileged to be doing the work that I'm doing. It really is fascinating.
Yeah, you know, sometimes you see a job and it just has someone's name written all over it. It feels like this was that for you. Yeah, it was like so long in the making, but only because it was exposing you to all these different aspects of kind of human behavior, but also tech and sexuality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think there was like a really stark difference between, you know, what I was seeing in the metaverse and kind of the types of behavior I'm studying now. As I said, it wasn't always the most positive societal signals that I was seeing. There was quite a lot of hypersexualized behavior. There's quite a lot of misogyny, you know, unchecked problematic interactions that were just able to flourish because it's very hard to police those kind of spaces and keep them pro-social. So I went from being in this quite dystopian environment, seeing things that I found kind of quite disturbing and worrying, and then moving into this environment that was really special and doing something really different for society. You know, quite disruptive types of very pro-social behaviour that are very consent-led and very different to what I was seeing previously. So it felt like this real leap from a space that I found deeply worrying to a space that I found so hopeful and magical. And it's, yeah, again, I feel extremely lucky to be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I know Field is turning 10 this year. So I'm curious what you've seen evolve over that period of time from where Field originally started and what you're starting to see that feels different now, 10 years in.
Sure. Well, I haven't been there for the greater part of the decade. I've just been at Field for 2 years, but it feels like I've been there for a very long time because I've been a Field user for a very long time, but maybe...
Okay. Yeah.
One of the things that I have seen evolve hugely is the fact that society is kind of catching up with what our founders had originally had the vision for. You know, we were built on this kind of exploration of doing things differently, this challenge to the status quo, kind of questioning about traditional relationship structures, and we were the first to do that.
Yeah.
And it was a very radical and political move at the time. You know, even if the politics wasn't writ large, it was kind of an extremely radical, brave and very heartfelt thing for our founders to do. And I think that the people using the app in the first instance really were kind of quite marginalised outsiders. I remember dipping my toe in first 10 years ago and seeing this, you know, what I found to be a wildly exciting, very different, quite a rowdy environment where people were just expressing what they wanted and needed very clearly, loud and proud. And even for me, someone that's always been quite exploratory in terms of sexuality and relationships and consider myself very progressive, I was like, okay, there's a lot happening here. This is, very new environment to me.
Now, sorry to interrupt. It started with quite a specific focus, right? I understand maybe just for couples looking for a third or for people interested in relationships with more than two people. Did it expand pretty quickly from there?
Yeah, I think in terms of the provenance and the features and affordances that we offer, I think it's really interesting how kind of like marginalised groups tend to have... comorbidity is not the right word, that's a very medical term, but if you're interested in questioning, makes it sound bad and it's great, but if you're interested in kind of questioning one part of relational identity, like relationship structures, then there's going to be quite a strong Venn diagram between, you know, you questioning sexuality and thinking about kink and desire in different ways. But I think it very quickly moved from specifically people looking for non-monogamy to people questioning the status quo, questioning the norms of script of how dating and connection is supposed to be. And back to the kind of original question, what's changed is that is no longer outsider or what is classically considered deviant behavior. It is becoming the norm. Society is catching up. People are questioning whether the things that we have always been told are actually serving us well, making us happy, and allowing us to connect in the most authentic ways. So the biggest change is not us, it's people catching up with us.
Sure.
Yeah, I really want to unpack that with you in a second. But before we zoom into that, I'm just curious about, it sounds like you are an OG deviant at heart. Like you've been on field, even if you haven't worked there for more than 2 years, you've been on it for much longer. I'd love to hear your personal journey, if you are feeling comfortable to say a little bit about your own off-script journey. We ask all of our guests this, and a lot of the things we talk about on this podcast are about having the courage to choose a different path than the one that we see all around us, or that feels like the one that is the most celebrated in society. Mm. So yeah, just really curious about what your journey looked like from, you know, studying sexuality in culture to finding your way to field.
So the thing I want to say right from the top is field really does hold a very special kind of significant role in my life. It has been really life-changing for me. As I said before, I've always been quite curious about how relationships work, how sexuality works, the inherent kind of power structures that are threaded through that. I was laughing with a friend the other day about how when I was younger, I remember kind of saying to my dad, so when someone gets married, the dad gives the woman away. And I was always like, okay, that doesn't sound too good. I'm not into that. Yeah, and also just kind of observing relationships around myself as I was growing up and thinking, okay, some of the stuff I'm seeing doesn't look like the healthiest of kind of exchanges, the healthiest of structures. So there was this kind of questioning, this kind of nagging sense that I wanted something different from quite early on. That curiosity was really accelerated by living in Berlin in my 20s. It was a very fun time, fun space to be in. It was, I would say it was an anthropological experience.
It's a great city.
So, you know, I quickly discovered that if you like techno and you're in Berlin, you were also going to be, you know, standing next to a dark room or a play space or somewhere where someone's having sex. And I found that kind of like really elevated the environment in those spaces, even if I wasn't invited into those spaces because they were mostly for kind of queer men at the time. But then I was getting these signs that actually playing outside the traditional scripts of relationships and sexuality has this kind of elevating, energizing aspect to it. And I was really excited by that. And my enthusiasm for all of this stuff didn't come with an instruction manual or a language, and I made a lot of mistakes. I had some pretty disastrous open relationships in my 20s. I don't think I really understood the rules of engagement, you know, and I learned the hard way, and I look back on those now and I don't think I was always having the best time. And then, as I said, I first found field about 10 years ago, and I just found it extremely liberating, you know, that there was a space like this in the UK as one that was open to heterosexual people or bi-curious people. Now, I don't think heterosexual people have been great at interacting in those kind of spaces traditionally. So it was kind of like, okay, this is a space that is inviting people in. The language is different. The script is different. There is permission to behave differently, and it is completely void of shame. Creating shame-free spaces is so important, you know, and that was one of the things I first fell in love with about field.
I mean, the energy you described in Berlin, it's electric, it's encouraging and hopeful because people are really pushing the boundaries. You can sort of get swept up in it. But I think just the nature of being a rebel is that you like to break the rules and push the boundaries. And then it can actually feel a little unsafe, or you can feel out of your depth. I mean, I've been to Berlin. It's kind of a scary place too, because you're not entirely sure. I've ended up in some situations where I wasn't entirely sure where the boundaries were. I was like, am I in too deep? We don't need to go into details. Okay. But you described field in a really special way. It's actually quite the opposite. It not only makes people feel welcome, but makes people feel safe. I feel a lot of the user design is to let everyone know that they're welcome as they are, and there's some safeguards that you put in place to make sure people are doing things safely and consensually. And so that must have been really nice for you to discover in your own journey.
It was amazing to discover, and it was a real sort of red pill, blue pill moment for me, because then I fell completely in love with someone that I met on a different dating app, and I kind of put it down for a bit, and that person was really wonderful and a lot more focused on a traditional kind of relationship approach. So I was like, okay, I'm choosing this for now, and actually not for now. I'd made a decision that I wanted to be this person, and I saw my life with them. So it was like, I am very happy that this magical, free place exists, but I'm going over here and I'm doing this now. And then there was another huge twist, and life completely blindsided me. At the start of the pandemic, I got diagnosed with a very aggressive and rare form of cancer. And first of all, it wasn't sexy. It definitely wasn't. Cancer is not sexy. It really kind of immediately kills desire, and it's very challenging for relationships. But my next 2 years just fundamentally became focused on survival. It was so rare that doctors didn't really know what they were doing. There was no set treatment pathway. As a researcher, I would literally research for 24 hours trying to find these very small sample studies and trying to work out what we should do. But my life just became this kind of like hamster wheel of surgeries, and your life just becomes this series of appointments, really. You kind of stop measuring time in months, you start measuring your time in scan results, and waiting and dreading becomes like your full-time focus. So it was a really rough time, and cancer brought your ability to sort of imagine a kind of happy future. It did for me at the time. I was, like I said, in survival mode. I wasn't really here. The other aspect of it was how quickly your body stops feeling like your own. So I found myself sort of negotiating with surgeons over which organs I wanted to keep. And I just never thought I would be having these conversations. It reminded me a lot of some of the stuff that I'd studied when I was learning to be an anthropologist, about kind of how you're like remade under the gaze of surgeons. You become quite objectified. I was also getting shipped around from different hospitals and specialists because what I had was so rare. I was like this object of medical interest. By the end of it, I didn't recognise myself. My relationship had broken down. We separated because cancer shines a light on kind of cracks that were already there. You couldn't kind of stick things back together. That's really when I came back to field. I felt very disconnected, and I remember thinking one day, I'm sure I really used to like sex and I'm sure I really used to like dating, but the idea of going into a traditional date where you're kind of interviewing each other about life partner potentials when I didn't even know if I was going to be around anymore was just horrendous. So field just suddenly came back into my life in a really big way, and it was such an important part of my recovery. It helped me rebuild myself in a way that nothing else could have.
Thank you so much for sharing. What I really heard at the end there is that there's so many reasons people can connect with each other. The way we've been thinking about it for decades is like finding a partner to spend the rest of your life with and get married. But so many more reasons two people can get meaning from each other, whether it's just sharing a night of pleasure or a deeper friendship or just becoming important people in each other's lives to support whatever they're going through. So thank God we're finally realizing that we should be expanding the ways we find intimacy and connect. And I'm so glad Field is there for you, and you weren't just looking for the traditional.
Me too. Really, really grateful. I think one of the things that's made me realise as well in terms of the research that I've been doing, I meet a lot of people that have been through really big life-changing events that have suddenly gone, okay, I'm stepping away from the norms of dating and I'm going to do something different. You know, they may have had an illness, they may have had a really significant breakdown. Something has seismically changed for them, and that has caused them to question what they've been doing up until this point and maybe refocus on their priorities. I mean, I'd love to, I don't know if it's the case for either of you, but I think a lot of people, when you speak to them, they can kind of reflect back on their dating history and kind of remember these inflection points, these pivotal moments where a thing has happened and suddenly you've bounced out of that and changed the way you might connect or date or do things.
Oh, totally. I think there are just moments in life that crack you open. I have my own history, which I've talked about extensively through the podcast and been really open about. In many ways, until something seismic happens, we just keep trying to make that version, my previous self, better. And then we realize we can break out of that altogether, and it's almost like getting a blank canvas again, and you get to rewrite the story you have of your connection to intimacy. And it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing so authentically and so honestly. I work a lot with women who are reclaiming desire, reclaiming their sense of self after some kind of rupture, right? Whether it's a health issue or experience they've had, whether it's just a sexless marriage or a relationship they've been in for a long time, whether something's broken down, right? And one of the things that I was talking with some of these clients about, and I was writing about on my Substack, is this idea that we tell ourselves the story that we need to be kind of fully healed before we're allowed to date again, because the norms of dating suggest that we want to look for something serious and long-term and partnered and blah, blah, blah. And there's often not space beyond that. It's not respected. What would sit outside of that isn't societally held in good regard. And so we're led to believe that you have to be kind of healed or fixed before you come to dating again. But I actually think dating and healing are deeply relational. And actually we can really heal parts of ourselves through being with other people and connecting with other people.
Yeah.
You can be in the middle of a crossing, right, where you're not quite where you want to be, but that doesn't mean you don't value and care for intimacy, whether it's emotional or sexual or otherwise. And so I feel like it's part of choosing an off-script journey is also trying to widen the aperture and the lens with which we understand desire and connection. So there's like this permission giving on something like Field.
Permission giving is a really good way of putting it, and I think that's why so many more users are flocking to Field at the moment, as opposed to other dating apps or as an alternative to other dating apps. Field might have started out as a way for people to explore threesomes or thruples, but it's offering a whole bunch of different opportunities and avenues to explore now. So who's using Field now, and what are some of the more recent arrivals to the app in terms of demographics and what people are looking for?
You know, my first peek into Field 10 years ago, those early days, most people on the app then were quite far along in terms of their identity journey, the level of self-understanding. They knew that they were seeking something different. They knew that they were colouring outside the lines, that they wanted something that maybe was seen as taboo, and they knew where to go and get it. And quite often it was through kind of word of mouth from other people that were there. So there was this core user base of people that were relatively familiar with their own wants and needs and able to express them. What we see now is that core member base, and we call them the core or the torchbearers, people that kind of really are lighting the way for others. The core is still there, and they're a very vocal and engaged part of our member base, and who we speak to a lot when we're doing research. We need to understand all members, but if we're really seeking sort of product direction, we want to make sure that it lands with these people that are actually shaping culture and bringing other people along for the ride.
For sure.
But what we're seeing now, we've got some newer segments. We've got the curious and the unaware as well. So the curious I would describe as people that kind of, again, they know they want something different, but they don't quite know what it is yet, and they don't know what's available to them yet. So they're often ready to make a change, but they might not have the kind of lexicon, the information, the experience, the role models, the exposure to know what they really want. And we know this segment kind of need quite a lot of help. They need quite a lot of support. And we've done some really amazing longitudinal studies with this group of people where we kind of screen them in to identify that they are these people that have some sort of dissatisfaction. They're looking for something new. And then we put them in the app for a week or 2 weeks and kind of, interact with people in the app. They are very quickly going through this process of relational learning. So they're seeing what's going on other people's profiles, they're seeing language that's being used, and they're suddenly going, okay, I think I might be a bit like this person, or I think I might want something that's been mentioned in this profile. So very, really quite quickly, within a matter of days, the curious are starting to evolve into baby core members who kind of beginning to say, okay, this is what I want and need, these are the things I want to do. For a few examples, you might hear someone that has never been able to say I'm bi-curious before saying, I actually am, I want to have an experience with someone of the same gender, or I want to introduce a third into my relationship, or I want to try something new. So those are the curious. They're kind of our later core members that we're there to help.
It's quite a shift in, I guess, even responsibility, because you started as a tool for people who know what they want to use, a tool for these deviants to just get what they want. But for the curious users you're describing, you're sort of providing community and education, a safe space, a landing pad, which is a whole different ballgame than just like, here's a tool for what you need.
So just on the point of responsibility, there are a lot of ethical considerations with all of this. And we have a really significant duty of care in terms of how we show up for people, how we support them, the guardrails that we provide. And that's something we are constantly thinking about in product and feature development. Is like, how do we help people along the way? The other thing that I want to say that's so important is if we think about, sort of clumsily describing this sort of continuum from core to curious to unaware, and we kind of think about levels of experience maybe, or levels of confidence along this continuum. There is no right end point. That is not what Field is about. And we are not trying to push people to some kinky end point where they are locked in a dungeon for the next 2 weeks. Or maybe they are. It's completely up to them. Or maybe they are, but there is no desired end point. What we are trying to do is help people along the journey so they land exactly where they need to. It might be something as simple as they spend a few weeks on the app and they're able to advocate for themselves in the bedroom a little bit more and just say, no, I'd like you to do this thing, please. Or I don't want you to do this thing, please.
Well, going back to the data that Field has released, the world capital for being vanilla is Brazil, apparently. Which really comes as a shock, but I was thinking about it, and suddenly I was thinking, what if, Brazil is just full of people who are very sexually liberated, and there's some people who just want to raise their hand and say, actually, I'm vanilla. And so maybe people are actually going
to be vanilla now.
Yeah, maybe users are going to Field because it's a place where they can say, hey, I'm actually vanilla. I hope that's okay. So, I mean, it's just a place where people can express what they want, whether it's freaky dungeon stuff or cuddling and being vanilla. And I think that's beautiful about the app.
Absolutely. And one of our design tags is vanilla. And when we went back and forth on that a lot, there was a lot of internal discussion around it. Some of the kind of core members were like, we don't want to see this. But what it evidences is that we are inviting that full spectrum. There is no right point. Everyone is welcome. What we need to give is the kind of features, affordances, tools, language, so people can really express where they are on the journey and meet people that are right fit for them. So that's kind of like an ongoing conversation between research and our product teams.
Sure.
Yeah. I think I definitely arrived on Field as the curious newbie. And I think it's actually true, the journey you described of people who would probably fly off the app within the first couple of days. The first time I got on any apps was only a few years ago. And I think when I got to Field, I was just like eyes wide open, like deer in the headlights, being like, what are all these acronyms? What does everything mean? And so I did have the experience of actually going through people's profiles to be like, process of deduction, that sounds good, that doesn't sound good. Don't know what that is, but, we'll find out. And I think that's probably what most people do.
I think we've removed quite a lot of the process of deduction. I hope we have anyway. We've
Okay.
glossaries and a lot more support in apps so we can get people there faster. Relational learning will always happen. Other profiles will always hold a mirror up to people so they can kind of think about themselves and their own experience. We never ever want that to stop. It's one of the things that makes Field so beautiful. But what we do want to do is kind of expedite the process of people having the right language, understanding themselves better so they can show up authentically. And I think there's this huge debate around authenticity and dating apps at the moment. And there's this kind of argument, like, do dating apps, really make you inauthentic because you're presenting this idealized self? Or do they actually allow you to be more yourself than ever before? And I would argue that Field is kind of the latter. We're really giving the breadth. We're not making it binary. Cole, to your point about all the, the genders, the sexualities, the desire tags. The canvas is broad, okay? And things that you can choose from are not there to put you into boxes. It's deliberately expansive.
Yeah, and you even offer a Field glossary of terms. I was reviewing them yesterday and learning a few new terms for all the different ways people can choose to express themselves or different desires they might want to explore. So you really are, inviting people to be authentic and inviting people to explore as opposed to trying to fit people in boxes like maybe some other apps can feel, which I think is great. Going back to, we were talking about this curious segment. Another big segment of the curious users on Field, in my experience, are people who are curious about queerness. You've mentioned there's a lot of people who are questioning their sexuality. And, for example, gay men, they may find apps like Grindr can feel like diving right into the deep end. And Field is a place where they can still identify as heteroflexible, for example, and they can dip their toes in a way that Field allows for them to be curious.
A couple of my favourite pieces of research, sort of research data points that I've seen linked to this. First of all, we know that there are a lot of men who are showing up on Field and identifying as straight, but searching and liking and connecting with men's profiles. So we are giving people a safe space to explore their sexuality. We see a lot of people's sexuality change whilst they're on the app, and we play a small part in that safe exploration of an experimentation to get them there. The other example I want to give is a very specific example of one of my favourite interviewees ever, and it was someone that used kind of a very sex-forward, transactional gay dating app that had really kind of carved out this identity for themselves as this kind of dom daddy. Someone would turn up on their doorstep, they would have sex, he would literally like call the cab for them and be like, yeah, see you later, nice night. You know, he talks about it kind of being this real conveyor belt that he had like inadvertently created through using certain apps. And he was one of our longitudinal research participants. So we said, you know, come stay for a week. The first thing he said was, my God, I'm not cool enough to be here. I don't understand the language. And we said, yes, you are. We're going to help you along for the journey. And then really by the end of the week, he had gone through this incredible journey where he said, okay, I've been having very different conversations to the hypersexual conversations I normally have elsewhere. I've discovered a softer side of myself. I've discovered that maybe there are things that I want to do sexually that I've never tried. Aftercare's a thing. I never even thought of aftercare. You know, he also said, I think I might want to have an experience where there's a woman in the room as well. So this person just went through this huge, I don't know if reverse engineering is quite the right term, but really we put them into a space that allowed them to step back and just question the kind of norms that they had created for themselves as a result of being in these hypersexual gay dating apps. And, you know, we talked about it. He created a bit of a prison for himself, and really he found it hugely liberating being on foot. It was one of the interviews where I kind of like had to, you know, kind of pretend that I had something in my eye. Really,
I love it. Well, we've said a few times in this conversation how the traditional dating apps put you in this box of someone looking for long-term marriage, yada, yada, yada. But, I mean, Grindr is an app that can also really put people in a box of saying we're all just here for sex and no emotional connection. We're just here to use each other and move on. Then that's its own prison. So, I mean, every group of people has these expectations and boxes they can get shoved into. And it's great that people are discovering other dimensions of themselves.
Absolutely. There is no right way to be.
Yeah. We keep getting sidetracked because you mentioned these three main segments of the user base. We've got the core group who know who they are and what they want. We've got the curious. And then what's the third segment?
So we've got the unaware. And the unaware are, you know, the members that when they come into that we need to think about most carefully in terms of stewardship and support. Because the unaware are very early on their journey. Again, they don't know what they're necessarily looking for, but also they're not really very aware of what field offers. So they may read some very early signals, for example, filling out your desire tags may be something that's really overwhelming for someone that's unaware because it's just a completely new world to them. So I think they are kind of defined by being really right at the start of the journey. And they can flip one or two ways. You know, they could suddenly learn more about what we're offering, what the space can give them, what the community can give them, and they may suddenly realize, yeah, this is really not for me. You know, it's not aligned with my values, what I'm looking for, or then they kind of start to go on their curious journey as well. So it's kind of, we as a brand, as a product, need to meet people where they're at, and we need to deeply understand people at these different stages so we know what their fears are, what their reservations are, and what the opportunities are to support them better. So we have to walk, you know, I talk all the time about kind of walking in the shoes of our members and deeply understanding them and hanging out with them and seeing what their day-to-day is like. And that's, you know, where this kind of like segment approach becomes really important because not all the same.
And how do you do the research to decide where to expand your glossary of options? You know, how do you decide when to add a new identity label or a new relationship label? Because this is a space that's evolving quickly and you're at the forefront of it.
Yeah, really good question. So I work hand in hand with a really amazing analytics team, and I have a team of researchers as well. And the way that we set direction for the product is we understand what people are doing at scale. So what's the data telling us? How are people behaving in the app? Where are we seeing less engagement? Which types of profiles are they engaging with most? So those really big picture data signals are kind of like our sort of radar, our early warning signal when we need to start thinking about things, and that can set directionality for qualitative research and kind of set my team off into deeper exploration. So the analytics give us the kind of what is happening in the app, what does the data tell us, and then the qualitative piece is where we go in and we talk to people and we shadow them and we do these longitudinal studies and we understand the why behind the behaviour. And then sometimes we'll hear something in, a repeated theme in an interview where we'll go to analytics and say, okay, we want to have a look at the analytics around this and what's going on. So it's this beautiful sort of symbiotic relationship. And I was describing this internally the other day to a team, and I was saying, if you're doing one without the other, you're kind of going into a room and you're turning on a torch and you're looking at a little bit of the room and you're kind of getting a partial picture, and without all of the different signals being triangulated, you might get the wrong story. And really, when you combine qual and quant research together, and this is the work of anthropology as well, you switch that light on in the room and you get the big picture and you understand the why, the what, and you also understand the opportunities for improving and kind of meeting unmet needs and helping people solve the problems they're having. And the other thing that we always look for is, what are the workarounds that people are using? If we are not doing something quite right and there is a really strong need from our members, they will hack through and find a new way to do it. And those are really great signals for us because, members are ingenious, right? Looking at what they're doing points us to things that we need to help them with. So,
yeah. You talked about meeting people where they are, and I think that's beautiful. And using all of this data to really geek out about what the system looks like and how we can kind of zoom out and put the big light on and, see the whole system. I just keep thinking, what's actually deviant anymore? Like sometimes Cole and I, we forget that some of these conversations are still not the norm. And maybe it's the same for you working at Field. You forget that most of the UK or wherever you are, doesn't really talk like this. So this is still fairly transgressive, I guess. But what used to be taboo and what's taboo today?
Yeah, we weren't talking about which city was the pegging capital of the world this time 5 years ago. So
sure.
Things have moved on massively. But I think there's something really interesting in kind of the notion of deviance and kind of how that crosses over with sex positivity. And if I think about what we are at our core, and I love the fact that you've reclaimed the word deviant as being something brilliant, but really in an environment where kind of sex positivity is like the driving ethos, nothing is deviant. Absolutely nothing is deviant. Whatever you want to do is okay, provided there is a consent-led culture and everyone in the room has the ability to consent in an informed way. There is no deviance. And I think that is the thing that is magic about Field, as it is, I absolutely believe that we are having an impact on culture when it comes to stripping out shame, stripping out taboo, removing this notion of kind of like deviance. I don't want to
reclaiming it. Because I mean, does something stop being deviant because more people are doing it, or does it stop being deviant because it's permission-led, there's consent. When I think about this a bit more philosophically, the thing that holds something in taboo is almost like everybody else being willing to shut it down, it's... And so when you're in an environment, as you say, a sex-positive environment where there is no judgment and you can kind of take that element away, something isn't considered by definition deviant anymore, but we still exist in the wider system. So we can still put the big light on and see that we are still, a small part of that population.
Yeah, that's true. I think also, without getting too out there about it, I think about Foucault a lot when I'm kind of thinking about this and like power and how normalcy and deviance is defined, and power kind of shapes what society considers normal.
Yes.
And it influences which identities are recognized, which relationships are seen as legitimate, which experiences remain invisible or are classed as deviant. And as language, we've talked about the glossary, as language evolves and people have a new lexicon for describing what they are, identity becomes a lot easier to see, it's easier to talk about, and it's easier to claim and own without shame. One of the things that Field is doing so brilliantly, it is speaking to power, all the time in terms of what it's doing. I think deviance has always been there. Deviance has always been behind the scenes, bubbling away, kind of fueling people having a great time. And I don't think that's changed in the last decade, but I think what people are able to articulate has changed, and what they're allowed to say in public and the words that they have to do it. So, in a kind of like roundabout, meandering way. The thing that kind of like fuels me most in this role is we are challenging the inherent power structure in terms of what is seen as right and wrong, and we are legitimizing things that were previously seen as deviant and saying, hey, that's just people having a really great time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think Nyla's question was getting pretty philosophical. We can always go into Foucault here. Foucault is welcome.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, a lot of sex and deviance is about power, and it reminds me of a conversation we had with a shibari practitioner who said that a lot of kinks emerge from challenging power. I mean, the leather community, or even time subverting power, and there's something sexy in subverting power structures. So, Nyla, it almost sounded like you were asking, do things stop becoming sexy when they stop becoming deviant? I mean, are we taking the fangs out of a lot of these deviant options on field because so many people are normalizing them?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was thinking a lot about, at the end of season 1, we did a couple of episodes around power and the way power shows up in relationships. And so this has been something that we've toyed with for a while, I would say. Like, what is it that makes something deviant? And I'm just curious from the perspective of, like at one time being a curious user, and maybe now I'm a baby core, who knows? But, like finding yourself in a place where you're like, you know what, there's a part of my world where I'm no longer deviant. I'm just normal. I think it's a sense of belonging that it creates, actually. I think part of what deviancy, maybe it's my story of like what it means to be a deviant. It's probably different for everyone, but there's something about not feeling a sense of belonging, right? And of course, we'll talk about community and how important that is. But by definition, almost the place where I do feel accepted is a sex positive environment where actually there's nothing that's that out there.
I don't want to take the fun out of it for you guys. There's something around reframing it as the removal of prejudice. Just because the language and the things exist, it doesn't mean everyone's going to be doing them. We know that from the data as well. It doesn't mean everyone is going to, as I said, there's not a desirable natural resting state of being kind of more extreme, more kinky, more into BDSM, etc. But it's, right. I think what we are doing is destigmatizing behaviors. So it doesn't mean you have to practice them or be involved in them, and it may still be minority of culture that are doing that, but we're removing the persecution and shame and I think that's the bit to focus on. So you're still a deviant, Nyla.
Yeah, don't worry, Nyla. But I think Nyla is touching on something really interesting. These three segments, the core, the curious, and the unaware. Have you found that some of your core users are feeling like their community is a little threatened by the inundation of more unaware people? It's almost like the digital equivalent of when a bunch of basic girls start hanging out at a gay bar, and suddenly it becomes the straight space. And there's, a lot of gay bars have been ruined by, you're not basic, Alexandra. How dare you call yourself basic? Queer spaces can be ruined when they become normalized and mainstreamed. And I wonder if people are pushing back. I mentioned the backlash around vanilla. What that does kind of points to a challenge for us as, the team that are putting the product together. We are a community of communities. And we need to build filtering and matching features and kind of community spaces within the app that allow people to find their people. What we don't want to do is be exclusionary, but we want to funnel people to the right communities and the right experiences, and that is an ongoing challenge for us. But yeah, look, change is always threatening, and I think this is kind of like the essence of what you were saying. This is kind of it's like special and dear to you. There's something about being in a marginalized group when you're doing something that feels like it is disruptive in a really positive way. You kind of want to keep that safe,
protect it,
special. But what we know, and again I'm going to go back to this torchbearer terminology, these people are kind of shining a light on better ways of being, relating and doing, and we need to really hold them up in high esteem, and we need to learn from them their rules of engagement. We need to take from those learnings and kind of package them up in ways that people who are maybe not in that lifestyle can understand, whilst also protecting the experience for our OG members. And it's a really fine balance, and it's a really big challenge, but it's one of the tensions that we are thinking about all the time.
Let's double click on that then. What does it look like to help people put words to their desires, and the work you've been doing around that with reflections and other things? Speaking about power, I feel like having the words to describe your experience can be a really powerful, self-affirming experience, right?
Yeah. So much of what we're talking about today is about language, and reflections is very much about language too. And I'm going to break down what it is exactly, but before...
And we haven't talked about reflections yet, so just briefly tell us what the project is.
Yeah, for sure. I will, describe it in a way that hopefully gives a really clear snapshot of what it is and how it works. But just quickly, I want to kind of come back to the core belief that it was built on. So really, reflections starts with this idea that the most important relationship you'll have is the one that you have with yourself in the first instance. So better self-understanding leads to clearer communication, stronger boundaries, and more intentional and consensual ways of relating to people. So that's the starting premise that we begin with. It's a self-discovery. For anyone that hasn't used it, please try it if you haven't. It's a self-discovery experience designed to help people really deeply understand themselves in three core areas. So desires, relationships and relationality, and boundaries when it comes to sexuality and relationships. And it's built around 165 questions and prompts, which sounds like quite a lot, but it can be completed in under 30 minutes. And those questions and the structure of the tool is very much evidence-based. It's rooted in previous research. And really, I keep coming back to this idea, it's shame-free by design. So it asks you really searching questions about what you might want and need outside of the bedroom or not want. And it does it in a way that, makes everything feel normal and okay and permissible. And then once you finish those questions, it will deliver a set of results to you that you can review and hopefully have this new insight about yourself. And of course, it doesn't stop there. And I feel like this is probably very much your word, but when giving someone a set of insights about themselves is not enough, they're only kind of come into play and get embodied when they're enacted with other people then. So I think the things that you need to have, are reflections, ask you questions about what you want, need and desire, but really when that comes into play is when you start kind of conversing about those things with other people or about them when you're connecting with new people. So it's very dependent on the community as well.
Yeah, the first step is always awareness, right? And I took the reflection survey. I think it's a fabulous way of building a foundational set of understanding about what feels right to me, what doesn't feel right to me, what would I like to try, what am I even curious about, what are these things that I've never thought about, is asking me to think about them. So I think it gives people the opportunity to almost be kind of handheld a little bit through that initial phase of, where do I even begin? There's this kind of fine line between arriving somewhere like field and feeling liberated and then feeling overwhelmed by, oh my God, there's so much here. And I think it's a beautiful guided, handheld process to just that first level of awareness that you need to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was exactly that kind of insight of people feeling overwhelmed that led to reflections as well. I think one thing I just want to really underline about it, there's a lot of sort of personality style questionnaires and quizzes that feature in other dating apps that really ask you kind of what you're looking for in this one-to-one sort of romantic match. And really this was our kind of counterpoint to that, because it starts with self-understanding, what's going to make you feel happy, what's going to make you feel embodied, what's going to kind of bring you back to life. And I think most other apps optimize for matching, and we are optimizing for self-understanding as that jumping off point. And it really shifts the focus from find the right person to be more aware of who you are and what you need to feel good. And that feels pretty powerful.
That's what really came through for me using the reflections tool. The way that I'm so used to engaging on other apps, basically trying to conform myself to look desirable, even what I thought about myself and what I thought I wanted. And then I did this tool and I realized that I'd been sort of lying to myself about a lot of my basic desires and that I wasn't comfortable with a lot of things that maybe I pretend to. So it was a really valuable wake-up call.
Oh, I'm so delighted to hear. I'm going to be mean. Can either of you remember something that really stood out to you in particular?
Yeah, I think there's a whole section about boundaries and how good you are about actually setting them. And, I've been vaguely aware that I'm a people pleaser, but it was actually just this huge red flag that I spend a lot of my time when I'm going on dates trying to present as the ideal date or the ideal sex partner rather than setting up boundaries. And frankly, it's gotten me in trouble. And so this was just You know, it even I think it gave me a percentage. This is how disconnected you are with your own boundaries. So that was the wake up call. Yeah.
I'm not sure it's framed quite like that, the findings,
All
but
right.
I'm really glad it was insightful for you. Interestingly, when we were doing the research for kind of what reflection should look like, the category that was most important to people was boundaries. It was it was the thing that came out as kind of the most significant member need when we were thinking about those domains, was kind of help me reflect on boundaries and where they lie for me. And I thought that was very interesting. You know, if you think about the fact that one of those modules is around like desire and kink and the really kind of juicy, exciting stuff, we thought people would go there first. And it was like, no, help me understand boundaries. And I think that's a very telling kind of signal, particularly in kind of modern dating, that people need to really, you know, reference and think about their boundaries and communicate them well.
I mean, no one misses an opportunity to talk about kink and pushing the boundaries on their own. I was visiting my teenage nephews a few months ago, and they made me take we all took the purity test, because these teenagers are obsessed with like things they've done and haven't done and what they want to do. And, you know, how are you deviant as a 16-year-old? We love those conversations. But of course, we weren't talking about boundary setting. And the sex ed class my nephews are taking doesn't talk about limits and connecting with yourself first, setting boundaries. So there's actually something really revolutionary and, I don't know, deviant, if you will, about positioning that as just as important when you're dabbling in a kinky space.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true. And actually, I work with a lot of women who are in the sex positive lifestyle. And I think a lot of these women have clarity around the kind of kinks they're into and what they're not into, whether they're into conscious monogamy or ethical non-monogamy. And time and again, the consistent pattern with what people struggle with is holding their boundaries in relation to another, right? And it's a complex thing. We're meeting somebody else's boundaries too, and you're kind of like in a negotiation, but it's also an embodied negotiation. It's not all in the head.
Yeah.
You know, so we've talked before about how sometimes people in the kink world are actually much better at negotiating boundaries. And it's like, amazing, I know what's on the table and what's not on the table, and I can relax and just enjoy this and surrender to the moment. And for a lot of other people, it's this like unspoken thing, and you're kind of looking for cues and signals. And so much of that comes from, you know, very heteronormative dating, you know, depiction or story or script. It's also what we see in the movies, these things that are often very unhelpful in helping you guide your own dating life. And so, you know, I think it's the most responsible thing to do. I've not been shy of saying this before in our other episodes, is that I think sometimes a lot of people in the sex positive world are a little bit irresponsible, because, you know, you lure people into these worlds and then you basically drop them in it, because they often don't have any support structures to help guide them in a world that just operates differently. You know, the terms of service are different here. And so what I loved about the reflections tool you have is that nobody needs to know. It's part of my app already. I don't need to pay anything. And it gives me an opportunity to just get curious about myself and be able to then ask or use language in a way that is more clarifying for the experience I want to have now.
I love to hear that. You know, in terms of reflecting on what you want and need now, the questions weren't created by me or my team. They were pulled from a huge body of pre-existing psychometric data, psychological data, pre-existing sexual scales, like we called them the Kinsey scale. We looked at other validated and tested scales around risk-taking behavior, relationship structures. So there's a lot of detail behind the tool and in terms of how it kind of calculates results. So yeah, I really would like to give a shout out to the very amazing team that worked with us on that as well. It was a real, we saw it as a real duty of care to sort of extend our knowledge base beyond the business and work with experts that are really familiar with the field of sexuality and sexual research as well. So we worked with a team at University of Michigan, a group of very amazing social scientists that were kind of femme, queer-led social scientists that were used to identity formation in digital spaces. So very long-winded plug for that team, but they were absolutely amazing.
That's awesome. And it really didn't feel academic to me. So I think you've all done a great job of making it feel very applied to me as a user. Do you have already some data of like how it's helped people or what they do with it next?
Or how it's informed the app, and if you've made any changes to the app too.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. So the first thing that we found was the biggest barrier isn't actually desire. Guess what? It comes back to language. It's all about language. So really the first big finding was it wasn't that people were suddenly discovering totally new things that they wanted to do. They were just being given the words to describe them for the first time ever. You know?
It's so powerful.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to specifically call out some data points that I think really underline this. So 58% of people became more aware of what they want from connections as a result of doing it. 51% became more aware of their desires, and 72% actually planned or changed to plan how they communicated those things in their desire tags. So what we're seeing is like a really significant change in terms of how people are actually expressing what they want and need, just as a result of, answering some questions about themselves.
That's great.
And we also found that it was changing behavior, not just thinking as well. So we asked them if they were more interested in discussing the desires that they had, and they were more able to do that. And over 60% of people said that they absolutely wanted to have those conversations as a result of doing it. To the point that you raised before, Cole, over half of the people that took reflections said that they were more able to discuss boundaries.
Great.
That's a really seismic shift.
Yeah,
Great.
and I imagine that once people have done the reflections tool and, that 50% or more than 50% that said that they now are able to discuss boundaries, like you said, the first time it's a bit clunky. By the 10th time you share that with somebody, you're getting more and more specific about what you want to say. And I know you do some like in-person events too, and I'm thinking there's probably a bigger community. So yeah, do you feel like the IRL stuff is also helping in kind of building upon what's coming out of reflections?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think it's in the same way that being on the app and seeing different profiles and learning from them, whenever we put people that are interested in these things and interested in deviancy and challenging the norms, and they have a space to meet and communicate and share their experiences, that's where the learning really happens. We've just done a huge study on ethical non-monogamy and polyamory and spoken to a significant number of people about how they learn the ways of polyamory, like how they learn to navigate ENM. And so
what's the secret?
so much of that is conversations with other people in the community and just being, and a lot of learning along the way and kind of making mistakes, but having conversations and having people to reflect on those things with. And it's a really big ask from our community as well, particularly when it comes to those who are ethically non-monogamous. They want to be shoulder to shoulder with other people in their community, not because they're looking for dates, but because they want that shared experience and they want spaces to discuss that. So we hear that.
Yeah, I started to run some community events in the last 6 months where I just break bread with people who are also in similar experiences. And it's beautiful. You see people arrive a little bit awkward, going to have dinner with strangers. And then by the end of the night, everyone's like exchanging numbers because they just found another. It's all largely platonic, but it's just really validating for people to just feel heard and seen in a way that they connect with other people in a similar path and journey.
We mentioned at the beginning of the episode how a lot of other dating apps are struggling. And I think a lot of that is more and more people are realizing that they crave community, IRL interaction, but also community, which is something Field is doing. Whether it started out to do that or not, it really is a space for building community and making people feel welcome. Do you think that's one of the big reasons that Field continues to grow while other apps are struggling? Or what would be some other reasons you think that you're continuing to attract users?
Yeah, one of the things that I think happens as a result of not having a specific end goal often. So if you are, looking to relate authentically, you are not looking for your future husband, wife, partner, but you are open to all eventualities. I think what happens is a lot of the exchanges that would normally, you would connect, find that you weren't compatible, and that would be it. That would be the end of the journey, the end of the connection. What we hear again and again is people that are going in with a more open mind in terms of what might become is they are finding very different kinds of connections. They're creating friendships. They are finding community. They are getting something constitutive out of these interactions that cannot happen on other dating apps because of the way that they are structured and framed.
Sure.
There's a very, very different end goal. So I think there's lots of different things that are at play in terms of why we are, bucking the trend. I think that's one of them. I also think something very important that is really front of mind for me is at a time when identity politics has kind of gone bonkers and there are not many safe spaces for people online to be authentically themselves. We are offering them that port in the storm, and we are offering them somewhere safe and hopefully more predictable in a world that is becoming increasingly hostile. We see this with some of the people that we work alongside with as ambassadors who kind of use social media. You may have experienced this as well, Nyla. Just in terms of people getting shadow banned for using very normal language about sex and sexuality. It is no longer safe to kind of express identity, sexual desire in digital spaces. And I think that's a very sad truth at the moment. I think it's indicative of where we're at in terms of the pendulum swing of populism. And we are, really providing a space where people can come and again be shame-free, judgment-free, and be who they are. I mean, I would say at the core of it is really great research.
Obviously.
Of course, understanding our members really deeply is so important. And the biggest finding that we had from this recent piece of work into ethical non-monogamy is that, people who are dating in that way don't want to be slapped around the chops with myriad features. They don't want loads and loads of new stuff. They just want spaces that really deeply understand their simple needs and really get it and encode that into their product. So I think deep understanding and simplicity are things that are really, really important as well.
Okay, so after 10 years of seeing all of this unfold at Field, what have you data nerds picked up on? You've got a decade full of insights into dating.
Yeah, really interesting. So to mark the 10 years of Field, we did some really interesting analytics, and I just want to, doff my cap to the analytics team because I did not do this piece of work, but it's a really wonderful piece of insight. We actually looked at 10 years of member bios to understand how the language of intimacy has been evolving over the last decade. What I really loved about this project is that it wasn't kind of a dating report. It became something much bigger than that. It's like this anthropological study of culture over 10 years. Really
fascinating.
Really fascinating findings. I think what really struck me most was how quickly cultural shifts actually showed up in people's profiles. So if we consider like every single bio is a tiny sort of snapshot in terms of how someone understands themselves or a particular moment in time. So no one's writing their bio in a vacuum. They're shaped by the conversation happening around people, what people are looking at on social media, what's going on in politics, all that kind of stuff. And if you squidge sort of millions of them together and you take an aggregate view, you get this sort of time capsule that shows how ideas about identity and relationships have evolved. So things that really stood out was see these kind of cultural kind of peaks, these cultural moments appearing in real time. So the analysts kind of honed in and saw that around 2018, around the Me Too movement, members increasingly started using words like ethical and sex positive as a reaction to what was going on societally. So real focus in terms of how people actually wanted to relate to others ethically and to be treated with respect in light of what was going on. So that was the first shift we saw. And then COVID was another really stark moment in that data. So that really changed the language of dating almost overnight. It was like night and day, like bios referencing lockdowns, virtual connection, lots and lots of sexting chat in bios. Kind of like finding ways to get their works off even though they couldn't meet in person. So that became a real focus of bios at that time. And, connection status became sort of vaccination status. People wanted to know, how...
Totally.
Where people stood on kind of the vaccine debate, not that it should have been a debate.
Oh, yeah.
Did
I
it
saw
almost...
lots of profiles like no anti-vaxxers or...
Yeah.
Yeah.
It became a screening criteria very, very quickly. People did not want to rub shoulders with people that were hugely opposed to them when it came to vaccination. So that was interesting.
With COVID, did you get a sense of urgency almost? People were just suddenly really hungry for human connection, and there was just a sense of less long term.
Yeah, I mean, we even changed one of the exploring features in the app. You know, it was very much about digital connection only, you know, with the idea that we're going to have these kind of relationships that were very much digital first, with no necessarily not any intent to meet IRL. Maybe not, but that wasn't the primary intent. The primary intent was, how do I connect, relate, and have intimacy with people in this time when I'm not allowed to leave the house? You know, so we adapted the app to afford for that. And then I think the final one that's really interesting is sort of around 2022, 23, we saw much broader mainstreaming of therapeutic language. And I think that really, yes, familiar, right? Doing the work, you know, people
doing the work.
If we think about what was happening on TikTok and Instagram and podcasts and kind of books at the time, when it comes to kind of relationships and intimacy, therapy's really been brought into the frame through social media. So that started showing up through words like grounded, consistent, calm, emotionally available, curious, and stuff like that. So you can see how social media culture is kind of seeping into the way that people express what they want relationally.
Yeah, it's that power of language again, isn't it? That's a powerful way of describing your relational experience rather than only describing the kinks you're into.
Yeah.
It's like another layer got peeled.
True. Personality types, they've had a boom. Everyone talking about their Myers-Briggs or their Enneagram. That's probably also in parallel with the psychology. People are really trying to get to the root of like who they are inside and describe that. Have you seen that too?
In terms of like Myers-Briggs relationship types and personalities, yeah, they do pop up on profiles. So do star signs as well.
Sure.
More generally, I think, you know, this speaks to what you were just saying, Kyla, as well, and also links to this kind of who I am, what my personality is. We saw a really big shift in terms of intentionality, the way people are thinking about compatibility. You know, is my personality type going to work with your personality type?
Right. I think that's it. Like, let's not waste time. Are we actually compatible or not?
So we did see that too, definitely. And there was a real shift in terms of people simply stating kind of what they were looking for, moving to stating who I am, you know, who I am, how I show up, how I relate. So we saw a flip from, you know, almost like shopping lists of experience, people talking about adventure, couples, threesomes, these are the things that I want, to this kind of shift to, you know, people talking about who I am, what I value, how I communicate, what it feels like to be in a relationship with me. And I think that really speaks to the kind of the personality test type mentality. People want to communicate the essence of themselves.
Yeah. Again, it's a shift away from trying to present the perfect mate, whereas just not beating around the bush and saying, this is exactly what I'm looking for and this is who I am.
100%.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about, you know, just zooming out for a minute, where the human psyche is after you come through a pandemic. You know, like we were kind of forced to face our mortality in ways that we weren't probably ready to. We were forced to let go of the freedoms of being able to just get up and make a plan and leave the house whenever we want. And so I think when those restraints are removed, you look at the world differently. You know, we had that great resignation period where people were like, why am I in this job? Like, what's actually meaningful to me? And then you had changes in the way that people were showing up at work or what they were willing to tolerate. And I wonder if that also seeps into the relationships that you have in your life. So in many ways, there's probably like a collective consciousness around what's meaningful to me, what's the kind of life I want to live, and what do I just not want. And maybe that's what we're seeing showing up in some of this data.
Absolutely, and I would love to be able to pluck out of the air the kind of data around the number of relationships that broke down during COVID. You know, I think it's a
Yeah.
I think that's a really important part of it. When you're thrown together in a way you weren't expecting to be thrown together without any of the normal sort of crutches that you have socially to kind of punctuate your day, you know, that can be very...
Right, it's a magnifying glass, right? Everything is kind of magnified to the point that you can't ignore it anymore. And it's interesting because I wonder if there's like any data to suggest that there was a boom or an increase in people entering the sex positive world as well, because I must say, like, my own experience of being in this world is a lot of people's journey of transitioning into a new way of thinking about relationships all comes back to the pandemic. We joined in the pandemic, or we decided to open up our relationship, or we wanted to try a threesome, whatever. So I think it was quite a seismic time in our collective history.
Absolutely.
Well, all these people trapped in their houses just craving really raw, basic human connection. I think it made people even reconsider what I get from human interaction and what I need. And again, that urgency to it. I just want human intimacy. So I could see that doing wonders for the speed of kink and other things being adopted.
100%. And I think it goes back to the point that we made when we first started talking. We talked about some seismic shifts that we've been through. Those moments where like the fabric of life just got kind of torn and everything was questioned. And that happened globally.
Yes.
So I'm sure there is some really interesting data about how that changed sexuality. Maybe this is in my long backlog of future studies. But
future study. I mean, imagining 10 years from the pandemic, you know, the absence of touch. I remember hugging was such a big thing, cuddles. Like you couldn't even hug your friends or your mom or anything. And after a while, I think, especially people who lived alone, you're just craving actually physical touch and a hug, even if it wasn't sexual. So...
Let's go to Mumbai. It's the capital of cuddles.
Let's do it.
I know we need to start wrapping up. I knew we'd really have trouble editing ourselves, the three of us talking. But looking ahead, I sort of like the idea that the future of fields gives us a hint at the future of kink and non-traditional relationships. What are your predictions for how the user base is going to grow and what things people might start looking for more? You know, what kinks are going to become more popular? What things do you need to add to the app?
Desires list?
How do you see the desired list expanding?
Let me get my kinky crystal ball out. We've done some really amazing research on the desire tags that we have already, and we've done kind of very large scale research to understand what's missing. I'm not going to give you specific desires and trends, but what I will say is, in terms of getting there and getting it right, it's this balance between allowing people to express high-level desires that are understandable to everyone, that allow kind of matching and facilitate matching, and then giving people the space to express what they need in more nuance. So it's that kind of balance of how do we reduce things? There's kind of almost this process of making things a bit reductive so people can match in the first instance. And then when we've kind of got that first layer of matching, how can we make them more expansive again so people really, really understand each other? So that's another tension. That didn't really answer your question.
So you got no juice for us then, Alexandra, around what's coming up?
I feel personally very strongly about the rise of pegging, and I think it's just a hugely and this is nothing to do with personal preferences. I'll keep that outside the room, but this is to do with a breaking down of a kind of like something that was seen as so taboo and stigmatized, which is about a different form of male pleasure. And I just think it is really great that we're able to have this conversation. I think it's really great that it has a name. It is something that was kind of like sniggered about, demonized, and it's just becoming part of the norm. And I think that's great. You know, whatever people want to do, great.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, and I think it's actually a really perfect example of like, I hope that a lot of things we call kink now, we stop using that label later, because men should not be afraid of pleasure in all forms, whether they're gay or straight or anything else. And, you know, hopefully someday it's not going to be kinky, that some men enjoy pleasure that way, right?
Absolutely.
We're talking about human connection, but do you think human and non-human connection, like computer and AI, is that a frontier that Field is talking about at all? Like having an option to say you're looking for non-human lovers?
That's a really interesting question. That's absolutely not something we're doing specifically at the moment, but what we are doing is taking a really considered and research-led approach to AI, because we know, even from just doing very quick desk research, we know that people are pretty terrified of the role of AI in intimacy more broadly. And I know that you've done some really great sessions. I loved the Deviants episode in terms of the Silicon Valley dev that was talking about his kind of various love affairs with AIs, and so fascinating. What the bigger picture data is telling us at the moment is people are really frightened of the introduction of AI into the space of intimacy, and we're taking a really considered approach around that. And we are actually doing really fascinating work at the moment with a group of ethicists and social scientists, again, to, you know, really lean into that duty of care and make sure that we're extending our knowledge to do that work really well. And we would love to talk to you about it at some point, but it is still,
Right.
it's still cooking.
All right, let's come back to it.
Something to look forward to. Yeah.
Maybe I might ask that question a slightly different way then. And Cole, I want to hear what you've got to say about this too, but what do we hope never changes about being human?
Oof.
In a world that's going to be so tech-led, and it feels like every second conversation is about AI these days, but something about connection is just entirely human to me. Like, I'm just curious what it feels like for you.
Well, the most human thing to me is also the one that I feel has been under threat for years, which is just physical touch and just being in the same place, just two humans actually being side by side. Physical human intimacy, I think, is under threat. You hear more and more about how, like, teenagers don't hang out with each other anymore. They just talk on apps. And, you know, maybe we're all going to have AI boyfriends and girlfriends in 10 or 15 years. I think it's core to being human that we just need to touch each other. I certainly hope that's not actually endangered.
Let's just hang out and touch each other.
Honestly. That's my. What do you say, Alexandra?
No, I was gonna say, I think one of the key things is kind of AI should never rob us of our authentic voice, which sounds like a really obvious thing to say. I think there's a lot of ways which AI is being used to kind of prompt conversations, help us reflect and think about different things, and maybe do that exploratory piece before we communicate. But I don't think it should ever take the place of genuine human communication. I think that's something really important. But actually, Cole, as you were speaking, I was like, hell yeah, physical touch. It should never, ever replace that.
We all need it. I mean, COVID, the whole talk about COVID made me realize, man, we just need human touch, right?
Yeah.
But okay, AI, sorry. In the last 2 weeks, I've run into AI photos on profiles. Not on Field specifically, but on other apps. And so now this is something you have to watch out for in the digital dating space, is people posting AI photos. And I don't even know what we're going to do about that.
I mean, I think there's an opportunity for using AI to police AI, and I think that's
right.
I think that's really good. I think one of the areas where we can really lean into the power of AI is when it comes to trust and safety.
Sure.
And how we use it to kind of monitor authenticity, how we use it to monitor scams and bots and things like that. And I think that's when it becomes really, really powerful. It's the stuff behind the scenes in terms of keeping a community safe. And I think that's what AI really, really affords, that is very powerful and not threatening to connection. It is preserving connection and preserving safety. And I think that's, a use case.
Here. Well, I do hope we get into the AI of it all next time we speak with you, because this has been so much fun. I knew the three of us would just have a blast. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. I've loved the conversation. Thank you.
It's been fascinating, and we must talk about future studies.
Yeah, no, I was thinking there's collaboration opportunities. Yeah.
Oh, we'd love it.
I'm pretty jealous of your job, so I'm just going to make you talk to me more about it. Yeah.
It is, I do pinch myself. It is literally the best job ever.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh my God, she's so cool. I was going to make a very inappropriate joke at the end. I was going to be like, oh, so Alexandra, let's meet again soon and touch each other. I was like, wait, that's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. It was about human connection, the thing we were saying.
Save it for the app, Nyla. If that's your kink, you need to find people on the app for that, okay? Jeez, that's hilarious. I actually really enjoyed this sort of history lesson, the trip back through time of all the big societal shocks we've had in the last 10 years and how they've sort of shaped the user base of Fields. I thought that was fascinating.
It's interesting to me how much I hadn't connected some of the big kind of societal shifts that we're experiencing as a collective that start to impact the way that we see just connection with each other. And that includes everything from the politics of the time to the Me Too movement, through this huge pandemic that's changed all of us, changed the way that we think about what's meaningful to us anymore and what we want to be intentional about inviting into our lives and our bucket lists and all those things.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask about politics and if she'd seen a rise in people saying how important that was, because, of course, it goes back to the conversations we've had about how society is really fractured at the moment, and makes it harder to connect above the noise.
Yeah, and how actually that polarization is showing up on dating profiles, right? Because I remember seeing profiles that were like no Tories and no anti-vaxxers.
Well, in the watermelon, just a straight to the point emoji.
Yeah, exactly. I think I went in thinking that, there's this fine line between feeling overwhelmed when you come to field, and there's like these, like, I don't know, 60 plus types of sexuality or desire tags or whatever she called them. And at the beginning, it feels like it's a bit much. Mm-hmm. And so I had this kind of question in my mind of like, is it really liberating, or is it just more emotional labor, like more overwhelm? And I think what's starting to land in my brain really is that I think the more we practice something, or the more we say something, the more precise we become about what we want, right? And what we desire and fits for me, what I'm searching for on a dating app, essentially. And so in many ways, I appreciated the different ways that the huge spectrum of options on field actually makes you think and be more precise. And yeah, just coming back to that conversation about the power of finding words to describe your experience or to describe what you're seeking, I think it helps us all as individuals to be like better at expressing ourselves. And that can only be a good thing, right?
Yeah. Well put.
I just love that an app like Field has an anthropologist as their head of research, doing all these longitudinal studies.
I mean, I think the digital space is what's most anthropologically interesting right now. So it makes sense Alexandra ended up there. I think that's where society is changing the fastest and the scariest. But I love Alexandra's optimism about using the digital world to connect. Let's remember that there's still so much we get from digital spaces if we use them with eyes wide open.
Intention,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and aware of the give and take of how much we need from human interaction to how we can use them to complement each other rather than choose one over the other.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to bring her back. I'm saying it now.
Yeah, she's definitely coming back. All right, everybody. That's it for today.
And until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and stay just a little bit deviant.